All right, so is that a fun passage or what? Did you know that that is the official end of the book of Mark? So if you ever look that up in your own Bible, there's a couple passages that follow, right? There's all the way till verse, I think it's 8 there, and then it says there's another paragraph, and there's a little letter after that that says, this was added later. This is like right in your Bible, by the way. You look at the footnote, and you look down at the bottom, it's like, oh, this was added later. It's not found in the early manuscripts. It's called the shorter ending of Mark. And then you go past that, and it says the longer ending of Mark. Maybe you've noticed this. And at the end of that, there's a little footnote as well. You look down in the notes of your Bible, and it says, this was added later. Isn't that interesting? The original passage of Mark ends with the words, they said nothing to anyone because they were so afraid. The end. So I'll go home. What in the world? This is weird. This is a really weird passage. It's not like the other Gospels. So we're going to be exploring that one today. My computer's doing a little freaking out on me. I can't see what's next. So we'll throw it up there. Oh, guess what? I do a lot of funerals. And I'm just going to say, this is Easter, and we're like, what are you talking about funerals for? It does actually apply. Like, I've gotten to know, like, funeral directors. And there's 3 things I've noticed about funeral directors. One, they're super compassionate people. The ones that I've worked with, they are really compassionate. They, like, feel for the families that they're serving. They're very much compassionate towards them. They really do what they do because it feels like a calling in their life. The ones that I work with, they're very, very compassionate. The second thing I've noticed about funeral directors, they're not weird. You know, like, if you ever like talking with somebody and you're like, oh, what do you do? And they're like, I'm a mortician. You're like, oh, you must be weird, right? They're not weird. They're regular people, right? They're totally normal, regular people. They're totally not weird at all. They like the same things that I like a lot of times. We have normal conversations when we're going from the funeral home to the gravesite. You know, we talk about normal things. They're regular old people. They're not weird. That's the second thing. The third thing that I noticed about funeral directors, they have stomachs of iron. I'll just say that. I am not going to communicate details here today because they get a little bit, you know, like, ooh, I don't have a stomach of iron. I can't communicate details to you without passing out on the floor today. But I was curious one day. Again, no details will be shared. I was curious. And I was like, so how do you embalm somebody? That was a dumb question. Let me just tell you that. So I spent the next 20 minutes from the funeral home to the graveside listening to the process of how they do this, turning white. Like, I don't have a strong stomach. They're like, oh, this is just how it works. This is how I was like, you do what? Like, really? Wow. So yeah, super compassionate people. They're regular. They're not weird at all. And they got stomachs of iron. I've heard some stories, y'all. I was just like, wow, you did what? Like, holy smokes. Now, why do I even mention that when we're talking about Easter Sunday? Because the beginning passage here, these ladies are waking up and they're heading to visit the tomb to do that act. They're gonna do the act of embalming. That's what they're gonna do. It says they're gonna go and anoint him, right? That sounds really religious, right? Really spiritual. They're gonna do a very religious, spiritual thing and go and anoint Jesus. Basically, it just meant that they're going to do their religious practice of embalming. That's what they're on their way to do. So I think these ladies have some stomachs of iron as well. And there's a couple of things I noticed about this passage at the beginning, right? There is a big stone in front of the passage. So we got to talk about the stones, right? We got to talk about the stones. Whoa, that's the wrong stones. Hold on. Next slide. Okay, that's the stone I'm talking about. We got to talk about these stones, right? This is a historical remake of what the tomb that Jesus was laid in would have looked like. So you can see there's a large rock, the shape of a coin, but a lot thicker and a lot heavier, that is rolled in front of this like rock, this cave that's hewn out of the side of a mountain. Now, when Jesus died on Good Friday, we did all that Good Friday stuff on Friday. I don't got to revisit a lot of that today because it's about Easter today. But when he died, they took him down from the cross. It was the Sabbath. They couldn't do any work, so they can only take him down. And their religion said no work on that day. So they laid him in a tomb. He didn't have a tomb. So this guy named Joseph of Arimathea, he's like, I got a tomb, and I really respect this Jesus guy. He can have mine. And he was a really rich guy. And so he had this tomb carved out of the side of a big rock. And then, because if you're really rich and you're going to be buried, you're usually buried with some stuff, you know, like a lot of stuff, a lot of your riches and things that were important to you. And so to protect against grave robbers, if you're rich, buried with a lot of your riches, they got to put a big stone in front of it. But Jesus wasn't rich, but he got buried in this rich man's tomb. So they put him in there. They rolled this stone in front of it. Now, it goes downhill. You can't really see it from this picture. But it goes downhill because it's really easy to push a stone down the hill, right? You got to get it up over a little lip, and then it goes downhill, and it covers the cave entrance there. But it also goes over another lip. So do you remember like in the wintertime and you're in your driveway and you're trying to get out of your driveway and you got a dirt driveway maybe and you're trying to get out and you're like on the slippery snow and you're just spinning your tires and you're making grooves that are deeper and deeper and deeper? Same thing. And you got to go forward and backward. You kind of rock your way up and over the groove to get out, right? So that's why they got these grooves. They roll it in that groove. It's not coming out, man. This thing weighs a couple of tons. It's a big monster stone. So how are they going to move that stone? The ladies are on their way to visit their friend. They're on their way to visit Jesus. He was their friend, their rabbi, their pastor, their leader, their teacher, whatever you want to call it. They loved him. He died. Now they got to go, and the Sabbath is over. Now they're going to go and do the work that weren't allowed to do on the day he died. So they got to go, and they're going to wrap him with all of these spices and aloes and oils. So they'll unwrap his body from the grave clothes, and they'll like coat this guy with all this stuff and then wrap him back up. Why do they do that? Is there a religious reason? Maybe. But there's also a super practical reason. Ancient religions were, they had meaning, but they also were super practical. The super practical reason they're doing this is because it's hot. You get where this is going? They want to slow that process down so it's not like a big, nasty, stinky mess really early on. Because if you've ever left like a meal outside in the summertime and you come back the next day, it don't look so great, right? Like it's like, ooh, this is bad. That happens with our bodies when we die. We actually go back to dust, but there's a messy process to get back to dust. And they're trying to slow it down so it's gradual. And so that's how they embalm somebody. They wrap them in spices and aloes and oils and then lay them the rest, and then they're done. They're going, they got plans, right? This is what they're going to do. It says Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James and Salome, brought spices so that they might go and anoint him. That means embalm him, right? And very early on the first day of the week, when the sun had risen, they went to the tomb. They had been saying to one another, who will roll away the stone for us from the entrance to the tomb? Well, that's a great question. But here's some things I noticed. Some things I noticed about these stones. They're bringing spices, right? They got plans. They have done the work. They gathered up the spices, the aloes, the oils. They're carrying it. I don't know how far they got to walk, but they are carrying it from where they were staying all the way to this tomb. So they've made some plans. They've got some purpose. They're like, yeah, we're going to do this thing. And then the next thing it says is that they started out really early. I don't do that. Today I did that. I started out early and I got here just on time. I don't like mornings very much, which is why I like coffee very much. I don't know if you're a morning person, but the only thing I like about mornings is that nobody else is awake and I can drink my coffee. That's the only good thing about mornings sometimes, because it's very early. Why are they waking up very early in the morning to go do this? I think there's a couple reasons. Again, very practical. One, it's going to get real hot later on because this is the Middle East. They don't want to do this work in the middle of the day. Second thing is, these are women. Like they make the world move. I don't know if you guys know this. But women make the world move, and then we do some things on the side. right? Come on, you know what I'm talking about. Women and back in the ancient days, men had they had authority. It was a very highly patriarchal society, but women were the ones who made the world move. They're the ones who are running the homes. They're the ones who are they even had businesses in their homes, and they were making sure things were happening. So they got a lot of stuff to do. They can't just not cook that day. They're not going to stop and grab some McDonald's on the way home, right? That don't exist. They have lots of work every day that they have to do. And so they're waking up very early because they have extra work they got to do on this day, and they can't skirt out on doing the regular work that keeps the world moving later on. So these women have some faithfulness. These women have some courage, and these women are making the world move, and they're going to do this extra thing of going and doing the embalming for their friend, Jesus, who passed away. But they're also doing something else, right? They made their plans. They've started moving. They're on their way, but they have no idea how they're going to get in. Could you imagine that? We're just walking, it's so we got all the spices, we got the oils, we got the myrrhs and aloes. How are we going to move that 2-ton stone uphill over the 2 grooves so that we can get in? We'll have to figure that out. They have no idea. They're actually talking about it on the way. Who is going to roll this stone away for us? We've made our plans. We've got our intentions. We are moving. Who's going to do that thing that we can't do? See where this is going? Right? The stone at the tomb reminds us of our limitations, but it also reveals the limitless power of God. So let us approach every obstacle with faith and courage, knowing that God is always with us. That's from Orthodox theologian Kallistos Ware. So there's a lot of symbolism in religious stories. When you're reading the Bible, it's not just like you're reading Time magazine. Here's how it happened. Here's the news article. Here's how it went down. It's from detail to detail to detail. There's a richness to these stories that are meant to speak to us in the modern day. And when you get your head into their heads, and you go back in time and you're asking the questions that they would have asked, and you're looking at the world as they would have seen it, it's not just about who's going to roll this stone away, but we have limitations. I don't know if you've encountered yours yet, but I have definitely encountered my limitations over and over and over again. But that doesn't mean that there's something wrong with me. It just means that I'm a human being. Your limitations are not weaknesses of your humanity that you need to overcome. Your limitations are just the limits of your humanity. And you're not God, and I'm not God, and we don't have to even try to be God. But you have limits. And it's really nice to know those limits, to embrace those limits, to say, I am capable of these things, I am not capable of these things. That's called humility. And it's really good when we encounter our own limitations, when we don't have to be perfect, when we don't have to be, when we finally give up all the energy of trying to be perfect and make everybody happy and have this appearance like we have life put together all the time. When we give up all the emotional energy that we go into maintaining that facade, it's I actually have energy now to just be me and to be good at being me. And a part of being good at being you is embracing the limitations that you have as a human being. So when you're tired, you've encountered a limitation. When you're sick, you've encountered a limitation. I was diagnosed with an enlarged aorta. And that means that my heart could explode. That's not as serious as that, though. So my doctor is don't lift over 25 pounds. So I'm at the very end of that, the edge of that. I just crossed the threshold to have an enlarged aorta. So if an aorta is that big, mine's that big. Did you see the change? Yeah, I didn't see the change either. So, but I have that limitation. He says, we don't know if that's actually how this works, but there's a chance that if you exert yourself, you could get it even more enlarged and more enlarged and more enlarged, and then we'll have to do open heart surgery on you. And I was like, well, let's not do that. So here I am at TSC, and I'm looking down at a pile, a bale of hay for my goat. And I'm like, that's 40 pounds. And I'm not great at math, but I know that 40 is more than 25. So do I just say, nah, I'll just grab it, I'll throw it up here, and I'll just walk out? It was very early in this process. And along comes this little teenage girl around the corner. She was this must have been her first job ever. I'm like a 6'5" bearded guy in front of her, and I'm like, I need help. She's like, yeah, what can I do for you? I'm like, can you lift that thing and put it in my cart for me? I felt like a moron. I tell you that. Like, I just felt so dumb. I'm like, I'm asking this 15-year-old little girl to lift something for me. And I'm like, maybe twice her weight or something. And then I had to throw in the, I've been diagnosed with a heart issue. She's like, oh, no problem. And she's must have been a farm girl too. She's just like whipped that thing better than I could have. I'll just say that. Like, she just whipped that thing up there. She's like, there you go, sir. Have a good day. And she walks on. And this thing that I thought was going to be a big deal, and she was going to look at me and being like, man, are you a sissy? Right? Like, this big thing, it never ended up being that at all. It was just like, sure, I can do that. I can help. People like to help, actually. They really like helping. It makes them feel good. I don't like asking for help. That's one of the things one of my weaknesses. But I'm learning how to do it a little bit more and a little bit more. And so, learning your limitations is a way to embrace humility. And then you have all of this emotional energy to put into who you actually are and not who you think you ought to be. And when you put your emotional energies into who you actually are, and you're not trying to maintain this facade of who you think you ought to be or do this impression of who you think other people think you ought to be, you see how much like emotional energy that causes? It's like, oh my God, that's tiring just thinking about it. But when you just be yourself, you give up trying to be perfect, you can finally be you. So we can make the plans, right? That's our job. We make plans, we get going on our plans, but God does the miracles. Like that's one of the messages of this Easter story here, is that we got to make plans. We can't just sit back and say, God will do everything, because that don't happen. If you've ever tried that, you know that didn't work. But also, if you've ever tried to move mountains by yourself, you know that also doesn't work. And so there's this balance in this passage that we're supposed to recognize, that we make plans with our life and we set out. It's really hard to steer a parked car. You could turn your wheels all you want. You're not going anywhere until you start hitting the gas and moving. And then all of a sudden you're steering and you're moving forward. That's one of the things here. Like, these miracles are not like grandiose, dramatic things. Oftentimes. Sometimes the miracle for me was I needed to ask for help from a 15-year-old girl in TSC to lift me a 40-pound bale of hay. That was a miracle, because I was contemplating not asking for help, and she came around the corner, and there it was. Miracles are often not very dramatic. They're often not like captured on camera, and this is the proof of the existence of God kind of things. We're looking for the wrong thing. Miracles are very ordinary, but they're things that we could have never planned, never thought of, and they're things that we just kind of run into. And you're like, oh, that's really interesting how this unfolded. Those are miracles. So we make the plans, we get moving, God does the miracles along the way that we can't do. That's a part of this passage that we got to recognize. Now, the next part here, it talks about how the tomb is empty. It's like there's nothing in there. It says when they looked up, they're in the tomb, right? They looked up, they saw this stone, which was very large, had already been rolled back. And as they entered the tomb, they saw a young man, and they were alarmed. But he said to them, do not be alarmed. You're looking for Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. He's been raised. He's not here. Look, there's the place where they laid him. Now, I don't know if you've ever lost a loved one and you've had to visit like the funeral home and have a visitation process. I lost my dad 10 years ago, and there was a whole process of visitation. If I would have shown up at the funeral home and they would have greeted me and says, we don't know where he is, how are you going to feel in that moment? Right? They don't know Jesus has been raised. They don't know what that means, Jesus is raised. Like, we have 2,000 years of history that has shaped our thinking in our brains. You rewind it to the very first time these words were ever spoken. You're not expecting that. You don't know what this means. How are you going to feel in that moment? They show up. He's not here. Where did he go? He's my friend. He's my loved one. There's something wrong here, right? They're looking at an empty tomb. To them, this is tragedy. To them, this is loss. To them, this is not a good thing at all. They're not happy in this moment. So when we're looking at this empty tomb, there's a couple things that, I don't know, it says that the stone was already rolled away, right? They saw this large stone, and when they got there, they were wondering who's going to roll it away when they get there. It was already rolled away when they got there. It was already happening. Now, this resurrection of Christ is like the action of God in the world. Like this is God moving in the world. God doing this miraculous thing in the human person of Christ, raising him back from the dead. So this is telling me that you don't have to have everything all planned out to a T and then have everything happen exactly how you planned out to a T either, right? You got to leave some room for some miracles in there. And sometimes you show up in your life and you're like, wow, this is already, some stuff is already in motion. God is already at work. God is like in this present moment with you, but God is also ahead of you on the path. And so here it says that the stone's already, it's like God has been here. Look, a lot of times you can't figure out what God is doing in your life until you're looking backwards. You're like, oh, okay, I think I can make sense of some things here, right? That's what happened to them in this moment. They showed up and like, okay, God has been here. Have you ever been like hiking and you see a footprint, maybe of some animal? You're like, something's been here, right? There's an emptiness to the footprint. Have you noticed this? It's a depression in the sand. And so there's the emptiness that is a shape of a footprint. There's no sand in that place. It's all pushed down. There's an emptiness that is a presence. There's an emptiness that takes a shape. And this emptiness is a sign that something has been here. When I was a turkey hunter years ago, I used to love turkey hunting so much. I was going out and I ran across this bobcat den. I'll tell you, I got a little bit nervous. Because can you imagine a house cat the size of a beagle? But ornery? Ooh, not like Snoopy. Not like fun and happy and dancing. But like, you're on my territory. I think I'll kill you today. Like that kind of attitude? That's what a bobcat is. They're like big cats with sharp claws and teeth, and they can take you down pretty fast. So I come across this bobcat den. How did I know it was bobcat den? I saw all the bobcat footprints around this hole in the sand. And there was little ones, and then there was mama. I was like, oh Lord, let's turn around and leave right now. Because if we disturb mama with little kittens in there, this is gonna be a hard day. And I'm gonna be bleeding by the end of it. Maybe dead. So we just turned around, we walked away. But I saw those footprints and I'm like, something's been here. And then I investigated and like, something with claws has been here. It's like, oh, this is a bobcat. And that hole is where the bobcat lives with all the bobcat babies. I was like, the footprints, the emptiness that was the footprint. You step down in the sand, you leave a footprint where the sand used to be. There's an emptiness that is now there, but the emptiness takes a shape of a footprint that says something has been here. That's what this tomb is. This tomb is the footprint of God in the world. So they show up and they're like, God's been here. Right? I didn't know it at the time. I didn't know how it was going to work. I didn't see it happen. But I showed up and now all of a sudden God's been here. The stone's already moved. So they walked right in. They walked right into the tomb. They're looking around. And Jesus is not here. They're still a little alarmed. They're still a little scared. They don't know how to make sense of this moment. Oftentimes we don't know how to make sense of moments either in our life. And it takes a little bit of living in order for us to wrap a story around it on what happened. That is one thing that happens. But they entered this tomb. This is like, they're owning it, man. They're owning the emptiness of what was before they encounter the risen Christ. Have you ever lost something or someone, like a job or a career or a loved one, right? And you never did the grief work. You're just like, I'm just going to move on. That grief work goes with you. And it like nags at you every day and starts tearing you apart inside until you actually step into the emptiness of what used to be. Man, you can't step into the now and the not yet. And so they're stepping right into the empty tomb. They're stepping right into the emptiness, right into the tragedy, right into where is my friend? We have lost this individual and now he's not here. They've walked right into it. They're owning this moment. But they got to do that before they can get to the things that are yet to be. They've got to walk into the emptiness of this moment and grieve and be confused and not understand before they can step into encountering the resurrected Christ. And then they said, he's not here. See, the emptiness of this tomb is the presence. For us, it's weird reading this. Like, hey, nobody's there. It's empty. There's nothing there. And for them, encountering this, now us reading this story, the emptiness is a presence. The emptiness is a presence. Just like a footprint is a presence. There's no sand in the footprint. It's been pushed down. And now we know that something has been here. And so they're looking at here, and it's like, God's been here. God's been doing something. We're not sure what it is yet. Thomas Merton, my homeboy, monk from the 60s, he said, contemplating the empty tomb, we are reminded that love is the ultimate reality, transforming even the darkest circumstances into opportunities for resurrection and renewal. I love that. Emptiness reveals the divine action in this story. And they step fully into the emptiness. And I'm telling you, that didn't feel good for them. But they stepped into it all the way. They didn't just peek in like some of the guys did when they came to check things out. They stepped all the way in. And they saw, he is not here. And the last section talks about, the reason he's not here is because he's gone ahead of you. The reason he's not with us in this moment is because he's ahead on the road somewhere. He says, but go tell his disciples and Peter that he is going ahead of you to Galilee. There you're going to see him, just as he told you. So they went out and fled from the tomb, for terror and amazement had seized them. And they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. That's where it ends. But it says that he's gone ahead. 3 things popped out at me. He said, go tell the disciples and Peter. I like that, and Peter. Because if you don't know the story, Peter done messed up. On Good Friday, we read in the Gospel of Mark that Peter was told, you're going to deny me by Jesus. He said, you're going to deny me 3 times before the night's over. And Peter's like, nuh-uh. I am going to stay with you to the end, even if I have to die with you. I mean, that's a great thought. That's a great, I feel inspired in this moment to go and die with you, Jesus. But then when the actual arrest takes place, he's like hightailing it out of there. And this little servant girl by a fire, she's like, hey, weren't you one of the guys that was with Jesus? He's like, no, that wasn't me. No, I think you were. No, it wasn't me. And then she's like, hey, guys, come over here. I think this guy was with Jesus. And then he says before the whole crowd, he's like, no, I was not. Don't even know that guy. I'm just minding my own business. And then the rooster crowed. And Peter realized when Jesus says, before the cock crows twice, you will deny me 3 times. There it was. He was reminded. That was a big failure. Like, holy cow, that's a big failure. To deny Jesus 3 times in his most hour of need. But guess what? He said that in advance. Like, this is going to happen. By the way, this is going to happen. You're going to totally botch this night. You're going to fail. You're going to fall on your face. Peter's like, no, I won't. I'm awesome. I am totally awesome. I got this, Jesus. I'm with you. Didn't happen. So then he's walking away feeling like an utter loser. He's like, yep, there is no way. I have messed this up beyond repair. There's no way. So Jesus leaves a message with the angel for the women. Go tell the disciples and Peter, make sure Peter hears this message that I've gone ahead on the road. Did you know that failure is a part of living? Failure is a part of life. It's embracing our limitations. But failure is absolutely a part of life. We fail, and all of a sudden we feel we're the biggest loser in the world. There's no redemption. I better either A, pretend that everything's all good, or B, fall into despair for the rest of eternity. But there's a third option. And the third option is failure is actually compensated for in God's plan for your life. There is enough grace, there is enough goodness, there is enough mercy in this world to compensate for every human being's failure. Even you. Even that one time that you got called out. Even that one time you got fired. Even that one time, whatever the biggest failure is in your life that haunts you to this day, Jesus is coming to you in the resurrection and saying, go tell the people, oh yeah, and that person that really, they're beating themselves up for falling on the ground. Tell that person that I've gone ahead. You see, in the plan of your life, failure is already written into the code and it's compensated for. Because you're not perfect. I'm not perfect. And you don't have to be perfect. We can give it our best go. But you will fail in this life. That's a part of being human. And it's a beautiful part of being human because then it shows us our limitations. And then it reveals to us and our ego that, oh my gosh, I don't have to be perfect. I don't have to have this all figured out. I can just put all my emotional energies, spiritual energies, into just being me. And being the best me that I could be. And that's going to involve failure. You will fail. I have failed. I'm going to fail again. It's going to happen. And it's already compensated for. So I love that part. Go tell Peter, the disciples and Peter, he's ahead of you. Right? Emptiness is the place where God just was. This is interesting. Like, oftentimes emptiness for us is utter tragedy and we hate it. And for good reason. But it also is a revelation of where God was. There's this cool story. If you're a Bible nerd, you'll recognize this one. Moses, from the Old Testament, he wants to see God's face. Like, I just want to see God. Like, I want to see your face, your full glory, everything. And God's like, that'll kill you. No, not going to do that. This is a really interesting story how it plays out. So, God says, I'll make you a deal. You can go in that cave. I'll put my hand over the cave door. I'll pass by. You can look at my back. It's like, that's a weird story. Now, if you dive into the Hebrew, because that's an old story, like 3,000 years old, like that old. So it's gonna sound funny to modern ears. If it sounds funny to you, that's why. But the interesting part of this is the Hebrew for the word back is actually not just like back or backside. Some people like say it's God's actually like rear end. But actually more accurate is, I won't show you my face, I'll show you the place where I just was. And so God covers the cave with his hand and then moves by the cave and then removes the hand, and then Moses can see the place where God just was. Is that how it really went down? Does God really have like hands and he's like coming down? I don't know. That's just a fun story from the Old Testament. I don't know how that works in real life, but the story is amazing. And I think, I'm not 100% sure, but I think Mark is alluding to that. Like, you can't see the resurrected Jesus in this passage. Actually, in the Gospel of Mark in its original form, you will not see the resurrected Jesus. Why? You're going to see the place where he just was. You're going to see this cave that he was in. He's not there anymore, but you can see the place where God's glory just was. You're going to witness it firsthand. It's not going to be there. You're going to look back and say, oh, okay, I see how this plays out. I see how God is on the move. And so this is really cool because emptiness is the place where God just was, but working on our behalf. You don't have to have it all figured out, and you don't have to do it. And then it says they said nothing. They are so afraid, and they're distraught, and it says that they ran away and said nothing, and they hid in fear. The end. Why is that the end? I'd never really liked to use Mark on Easter, but when we follow the liturgical calendar, it pops up every now and then, every 3 years. And so here we are. Why is it ending? Well, somebody else didn't like it, and they wrote another ending, and they put it in there. And then someone didn't like that ending, and yeah, that one kind of sucks. And they threw another one in there that's a little bit longer. But why did Mark end here? That's what we got to be under, questioning. Why does Mark end with everybody hiding in fear and running away and saying nothing? Well, there's an interesting thing that Mark is doing with some words. There's 5 times in Mark that God does something really cool, and Jesus is like, don't tell anybody. Don't tell anybody. But then somebody goes and tells somebody, and then everybody flocks out to see Jesus. It's like this pattern that happens. And now, at the end, Jesus is like, all right, I've conquered death. Go tell everybody. And then they don't do it. So they're writing to like a small church of like Roman people. So Mark is trying to tell them something that didn't apply to later audiences. So they added a couple more endings to make it applicable for other audiences. But for this small group of Romans that were meeting as a small church, and they received this letter from Mark, here's the gospel how I understand it. They're like sitting in fear. Life is hard, and they don't understand a lot of the things that God is up to. And so they're probably just like sitting on their hands. This is all speculation, by the way. This is not in any commentary. We don't know why he ended it here, but this is my best speculation. My best speculation is that the church that received this message, they were hiding in fear. They were hiding in fear from the powers of the Roman government that were after them to kill them. They were hiding in fear from the harsh and oppressive world that's out there on their heels. They're hiding in fear because they're afraid of death. And Jesus said, I've conquered death. So go tell everybody I conquered death. And they're hiding in fear, the end. And so that was like this indictment for this church, like, oh my gosh, we're just like that right now, aren't we? We need to get up off our hands and start telling. Now, I'm not going to hand out tracts to you guys and say, go tell everybody that Jesus died for their sins, and if they pray the magic prayer, they can go to heaven when they die. That's not in the text. What is in the text that they need to be going telling people about? Right? They need to be telling people that fear not the difficulty in this life. Love wins. I know it's hard. I know it's rough. It is a crazy world nowadays. But the message of Mark is, yes, all of that is true. And still, love wins out. Love is going to win out. At the end of all things, love wins out. Fear not the empty tomb, for it is the gateway to new life and the manifestation of God's unfailing love for humanity. Teresa of Avila. Right? So God is on the move, preparing the way. He's not here. He's ahead of you in Galilee. Go there. So I don't know what empty tomb that you're faced with this Easter. I don't know exactly all the details of everybody's life here. I don't know if you've lost a job. I don't know if you've lost a loved one, if you've lost aspects of your health, if you've lost faith, if you've lost purpose. You're just kind of floundering around wherever you are. I don't know what empty tomb that you are in. But here's what I do know, that God does not carve the tombs that you inhabit, but God will inhabit the tombs that life carves for you. God did not make that thing happen to you. God did not orchestrate things so that this happens and you lose this and this. God's not some puppet master pulling all these strings somewhere. You're like, oh, God must have a plan for all this happen. You know what? God does not carve your tomb. Jesus didn't carve his tomb. Someone else carved his tomb and he inhabited that tomb. Whatever empty tomb you are faced with on this Easter, God did not carve your tomb. But God will inhabit the tomb that life carves for you and do miracles. Because God is the God of a resurrection. That's how it works. God is with you in the absence. God is ahead of you on the journey. And God is moving stones too big for you. That's the message of Easter today. Our benediction is this. In every garden, hope is waking, fragile shoots and buds are breaking. Through the earth to new creation, knowing the sun will bring its liberation. And we who are but dust of earth and sky may feel our hope renewed and lifted high as we too hear creation's call and know that Christ is risen from the fall. The tomb is empty, death is undone, and we are free to rise with Christ, the risen one. May hope and joy, like flowers in the spring, fill our hearts and souls as we rise with him. Let every garden sing with praise, for Christ is risen, and we are raised. That is Risen by my favorite poem writer, Malcolm Guite. And we have one last song.
For our closing time, let's feature Nikki Fay on the bells. Thank you, Nikki. And also I'd like to